Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. How is everyone doing this morning? Welcome back to the Good Morning Asgard podcast, episode number 51, where today we're going to talk about the Mission Impossible 7 box office and also about Sound of Freedom's box office, as both are showing to be impressive in different ways. Obviously, Sound of Freedom is significantly more impressive than Mission Impossible's box office because when you think about how little was spent on the actual rights to get the movie from Angel Studios, right? Angel Studios is distributing the film, but they bought the rights from Disney, of all companies, to be able to actually distribute the film. And I believe the total that was been estimated that they spent was around a cool $5 million. And the film is well on pace to easily pass $100 million probably over the course of this week, meaning it'll get well past $100 million by next weekend. The big question, of course, is going to be just how much money domestically does it make, and if it has any, and right now it is projected to have some international presence in certain countries. I believe it is actually going to be released in certain South American countries by chance. Either way, it's probably going to be relatively limited if I had to make a guess. It still is going to add more money. So Sound of Freedom, especially when you think about how much was spent on the actual film, let alone what Angel Studios spent to actually get the movie itself, it is a huge box office win, a huge return on investment, whereas with a film like Mission Impossible 7, it is doing just fine. And there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of speculation out there about the film doing very, very poorly. But when you actually break down the numbers historically for not only the Mission Impossible franchise, but also where this film stands up against other movies that have had similar openings, this movie is still doing really, really well. And especially given the fact that it has had one of the weirdest opening schedules, one of the weirdest release schedules that I have seen in some time, releasing in some places as early as the Sunday before its opening, having the fan screenings on Monday and then opening with the premieres on Tuesday here stateside. It is, I think, a very interesting box office perspective, because I think it is going to kind of set a standard that we'll be able to look at in the future. And also it'll be answering the question of, is it worth putting your film out early just to get those premium format screens for a few extra days, as in the case of Mission Impossible 7. And we'll talk a little bit about why Tom Cruise, why McQuarrie, why any of the people behind the film would have had this film released the way that it did. It has a lot to do with some of the politicking behind the scenes from people like Christopher Nolan and his film Oppenheimer, and we'll just talk about that and what this means will likely be the end result for Mission Impossible 7 as well. Before we go further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, that the fire button, iTunes, smash the rumble button as well. We're also live on Kick and Twitter. Let's go ahead and say hello to the people. We got Stargoose hanging out over on Rumble. What is going on, Stargoose? Thanks for being here. Mike Jackson was here early on YouTube saying, "Hail early chat and the 199. Hail to you." He then goes on to say, "Tell Baby Thor not to put Mjolnir on your bookshelf anymore." Yes, tell Hollywood to stay away from my bookshelf as well. As you can tell, my background is not nearly the same. If you were watching Friday Night Tights or if you were on social media and you saw the clips from Friday Night Tights this past Friday, you would have seen that just as Jeremy was talking about Hollywood collapsing, as if ordained by the Lord himself, the shelf behind me fell against the wall. So just to kind of give some perspective and to explain exactly what happened. So my room was being worked on. We have friends over, family friends over, and one of them is able to work on, is not an electrician per se, but is able to work on these things and was fixing certain light switches, etc., and needed to take off certain things that we had to move the Blu-ray shelf away from the wall. And because of that, and because of the way it is designed, it was essentially just leaning ever so slightly. And somehow, some way, at that exact moment, it was able to have enough of an angle so that it actually just fell back against the wall. That's why you saw it hit the wall before the movies actually fell out. And once it hit the wall, with these Blu-ray shelves, as many of you all know who have these Blu-ray shelves, it has a very weak back because the back is more so meant to be a visual, more so than anything practical, right? It does serve some practical purpose. It means that your Blu-rays won't go, through the shelf if it's like maybe slightly off the wall, but it is also not really meant to have a lot of weight on it. So that's why as soon as the shelf leaned back against the wall, the weight of the movies just collapsed it, and they all went everywhere. So that's why there's no shelf behind me. The shelf itself is actually fine. It's just the back panel that's destroyed. There's also, you can't really see it too well, but you might be able to see a little bit. So the paint is scratched because that's where the shelf fell on the wall. So some of that paint did get scrapped. So I guess some of the good news is that I already had a lot of movies that I needed to integrate into the collection anyway. So this gives me the ability to re-alphabetize, to put them back into order once again. However, it also means I have to put them back in order again. And even though there are certain stacks that are in order, there's also a lot that are not, and are now obviously very much mixed up in different ways. And so I'm actually in the process now of scanning my movies, since I have a little bit of time now, because it's going to take a while to get this stuff back up and running, to actually scan my films into, everyone knows I use my movies, Blu-ray.com, great site if you are into physical media and tracking that kind of thing. And one of the things that you have is the ability to create collections. And so you can scan the QR codes, and it's actually a very easy to go system. And so that way I'll have the order there digitally. I forgot how I did it last time. But anyway, yeah, if anyone's wondering, that's what happened to the Blu-ray shelf. That is the story. And it was funny. So again, obviously it was something that was definitely frustrating immediately when it happened. But luckily it happened on Friday Night Tights. Had that happened off stream and I had just like waken up, to come downstairs and then find it like it was, that would have just been, infuriating. But the fact that at the very least it was able to happen the way that it did definitely made it a little bit easier to get through. But it was definitely a frustrating thing when it initially happened. Let's see. Father Christopher, hail to you, Father, says, sitting in an airport in Minneapolis, saying hi to all. Well, hello to you, Father. Hope you're doing well. Candy T in the chat. What is going on? Welcome back. Hail to you. Justin of the Red Shirt. Hail to you. Thank you very much for being here. Father Christopher Miller says, try to watch Shazam 2, but quit after 5 minutes. I do not blame you. Then I noticed they had John Wick 4, got 2 minutes done, and will finish on my next flight. Only 2 minutes in. That's a very short amount of time to be into a film as long as John Wick Chapter 4. But you're definitely picking the better movie there. Shazam 2 is quite a mess. It's quite a mess. And John Wick Chapter 4, on the other hand, is actually a very entertaining film. Very well done, especially if you enjoy the franchise already. Let's see. Ready? Heckery, what's going on? Ready? Welcome back into the chat. Let's see. We also got Corona Sunrise in the chat. Hail to you. Bruce, what's going on? Saying good morning. Good morning to you. Thank you for being here. Debise808, welcome to the chat. We also, let's see. What happened to the bookcase? Hopefully that explained it. It's not a bookcase, all right? It's a Blu-ray shelf. There's a very clear distinction between those things, all right? Bookshelves are for books. Blu-ray shelves are for Blu-rays. Simple as that. Thanatos Felicitas, it's been a while, dude. Thanatos, I feel like it's been a long time, man. By the way, for everyone who has been putting up with this weird summer schedule this year, I feel like there's been more interruptions and more delays in my streaming schedule this summer than in previous ones, which is just kind of insane when I think about like what's happened over the last few summers. The summer of Baby Thor, for instance, was one where I thought nothing would be able to top that as far as any type of inconsistency or being busy for obviously justifiable reasons. But anyway, thank you all again for putting up with that schedule and for also having to cancel this past Saturday. JC McDonald, what's going on? As of right now, there is not a way to watch it unless you sail the high seas. However, for this kind of movie, don't sail the high seas. It's a film that deserves to be supported, especially with the message that it is trying to get out there. Really, when it comes to trafficking, one of the best things one can do is provide exposure, right? To expose, to basically think of it this way. There is this darkness. There is, this place where you have just all the most disgusting creatures of all time that need to have the light shown on them to dispel them, right? To dispel the darkness, to dispel all of the rodents, as it were. And that's the reason why this film needs to be seen. For those that are not able to because it's not playing near you or it's not international yet, they are going to have this released eventually on physical media and on, I don't know necessarily streaming. I think it's going to be on Angel Studios streaming service. I can't speak for it because, again, it is Angel Studios specifically is a religious company, right? It is a faith-based company. The film itself, it's crazy to me, and it infuriates me that the media will continue to try to label Sound of Freedom as a faith-based movie just because they happen to have the phrase "God's children are not for sale." There's no political ideology. There's no religious ideology being pushed in the film whatsoever. And it's amazing that we can't even have characters in a movie mention the name God without somehow, some way, they painting the entire thing as faith-based when, again, the movie was actually made by 20th Century Fox before Disney bought it. Disney bought 20th Century Fox, had the rights to this movie, did not do anything with it for about a year, then gave the rights, sold the rights over to Angel Studios. So to say that this is a faith-based movie in any way is, I think, incredibly disingenuous. But you will be able to get that eventually online. You just might have to wait. Let us see here. People talking to each other. Let's see. Rash Kolinov. What's going on? Welcome back. Can't see the stream somehow. I don't know what would have happened. Hopefully no one else is having any issues, but we are live on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, and also on Kick. If you mean that it was not showing up in your stream, I did notice that. I had to hunt for the stream for some reason, which again, YouTube does that from time to time because that's just what YouTube does. That's why I try to always post the links onto the social media platforms, onto the Discords. That way, if notifications aren't working for YouTube, as they very rarely seem to in any consistent way, then at the very least you have the notifications in that capacity. So that's why I always recommend people to either join the Discord server or to follow me on any of the other social medias. Dragon Smoke 90, what's going on? Dragon Smoke, are you the one that always hangs out? Yes, you are. You're the one that hangs out over on Kick. So thank you very much for supporting over there, and thanks for being over here today. Let's see. Candy T says, I was watching and it was so crazy. Yeah, Candy T saw the shelf collapse in real time, and it really honestly was. And when I was seeing the videos after the fact, I had kind of forgotten that that was the conversation that was being had at the time. And so going back and watching how perfect the timing was, it was amazing, right? Some people think, or might have thought, and my wife, I know, initially thought, oh my goodness, like, was this just cut together to look this way? And it's like, no, this was the natural way in which the course of events. There was one really great video where someone actually slowed it down to see my reaction in real time. You can see as soon as it hits the wall, my shoulders like kind of go up a little bit because I'm just like, what in the world? And apparently upstairs, because my wife was upstairs, our family friends were upstairs too, and it sounded apparently like something hit the house. And then, of course, the sea of Blu-rays falling, I'm sure also sounded very interesting as well. Bruce says the spots that have paint knocked off are advisable. Are advisable? Or just mean visible? I think he meant visible. I got you, Bruce. I know what you mean. The Glackener, what is going on? And I'm just going to, again, start off right there. You didn't tag me, but I saw that first thing. So Mission Impossible will bomb? No. Glackener, there is no data at this point to suggest that the film is going to bomb. One can argue saying, okay, well, maybe after 2 weeks, if the numbers fall a certain way, then we have to have that conversation because the movie does need to make a lot of money to break even, right? Right now, that range is between 750 and 900 million as far as its break even is concerned for this movie specifically. And here's the thing, though. If you look at the numbers, and again, I'm going to show you the data. Here's the problem that I think a lot of people are really running into when it comes to talking about Mission Impossible's box office is that because of the very weird 5-day release, right? Opening on Sunday, Monday in certain places, and then Tuesday in other places, and opening up before, it was able to kind of dig into what would have been and what likely would have been a very big box office weekend for it, right? If you look at the numbers, as of this point, right, it's made $236 million worldwide. So after its first weekend, it is at $236 million. And obviously, is that the $250 million that was being projected? Well, no. And remember, those are the projections that are being put out by so-called experts. And, we always try to cover those things. But remember, we covered this a lot when Super Mario Brothers came out, right? Remember when that movie came out, the projections came in, and what happened? Every day, they had to update their projections because they did not know how to track it. Because there had never been a animated Nintendo movie before. So it kind of makes sense that that is the case, right? That's one of those, hindsight is 20/20. The same thing can be said for this movie too, because there's not really a lot of data out there for 5-day releases on a movie. Early 5-day releases, mind you, for a movie over a non-holiday frame. There just isn't a lot of data out there. And so I think that is what's throwing a lot of people off because they're saying, oh, well, its opening day wasn't all that good, or this day wasn't all that good, and oh man, that opening weekend, not all that good, or it didn't meet the projections. It's like, okay, but movies can fail to meet projections and still do really well and can still make money. And again, we'll go into the numbers and we'll explain why. There's one article that I think is incredibly important to showcase why anyone saying that this movie is an outright failure either does not follow the box office or is just making a false assumption. And again, there's a lot of data out there to suggest that at this point in time, as of right now, the movie is doing exactly what a Mission Impossible tends to do. And if you remember, the last Mission Impossible film that came out made over $900 million worldwide when you actually adjust those numbers for inflation back in 2018. So, and if you actually look at the numbers comparing what it is today, right, what the Dead Reckoning Part 1 was able to do versus what the original film or the last film, Fallout, made, you start to see, oh, wait a minute, there are definitely certain things that seem to indicate that it's actually trending in a higher direction potentially. And again, I say potentially because we don't know what Oppenheimer's box office numbers are going to be. I kind of doubt the fact, I just was looking this the other day, that Oppenheimer is claiming right now, or there's an estimate out saying that it only costs $100 million to make. I don't buy that for a couple of reasons. The biggest one is because the entire film was shot on IMAX cameras. They actually had to invent a new IMAX film stock to shoot the black and white sequences that had not existed prior to Nolan. So Nolan was able to get them to create a black and white IMAX film stock. And then also the rumor is that he had about 7 miles worth of IMAX film shot. IMAX film is not cheap. So when I hear $100 million and I hear how much film was used, and I know he used practical effects, $100 million just does not sound correct. It sounds like it's lowballing. Now, that's been the box office budget, I feel, for a while that's been promoted, right? That's been out there. Something tells me that that number might end up actually ballooning over the course of it, right? Anyway, Lord Shax, what is going on? Welcome back over on Rumble. If you have a comment or question, just put at Odin, the very beginning of your comment, at Odin. Let me know you're trying to get my attention. But anyway, we will talk again. We'll go into much more full detail on why Mission Impossible is not in a bad situation. Is it an amazing situation, breaking all kinds of records? No. Is it matching the projections of the box office so-called experts? No. But is it doing poorly? No. You really can't say that if you actually look at the data as it is. But again, we'll get to that. We'll talk about it. Let's see, Stargoose over on Rumble, time to say, very grateful to have a Geeks and Gamers commentator that doesn't constantly drop F-bombs. Appreciate you, brother. Well, thank you, Stargoose. I appreciate you, man. Yeah, it's something that I think needs to be had every now and then. That's why I would love to be a part of some of the gaming streams, because even though I'm not a major gamer, I do play games like Mario Kart and things like that, right? I would call them more low-skill games. Not to say that anyone who plays those games don't have skills, but, I mean, obviously, when you think about it, more people, right? More broad appeal, right? More broad mass appeal for those games than for other ones. But with that being said, I do think that it would be nice to have a gaming stream where you have a bunch of people that don't curse. Because honestly, I think that's even funnier, because now you're having a bunch of people trying to come up with different words that are not actually curse words, right? And I think that is actually even funnier in a lot of ways. But anyway, that is just me. Lord Shax, I just saw that you put the at Odin after the fact. It's okay, man. Just, yeah, if you want it read out loud, again, obviously you can comment whenever you want. But if you want to just read out loud, that's the only reason why I have to put the out Odin, because I want y'all to be able to have conversations with one another without having to worry about it. Let's see, Lord Shax, though, says, I like John Wick 4, but in the end, it made me sick and tired of just fight scenes. Apparently, I have a time limit on fight scenes, and this movie went way over it. And I understand that, right? And again, that to me, I think is a valid criticism, is that it is on the long side, and there are a lot of fight sequences. And so anyone who says that there's a little too many for your taste, hey, to me, that's a valid point for sure. I did want to give a shout out before jumping into the numbers, though, that first off, shout out to Reed, who had donated 2 days ago. So I think this was in anticipation of what would have been the Saturday stream. But Reed, thank you for the $20 donations via Streamlabs. I'll go ahead and just refresh that real quick. And Reed had said this: went to see Mission Impossible. It was, hold on one second. Let's see. It was great. There were not many in the theater, though. Some people have said it was dearer than they expected and decided not to. Oh, maybe more dreary than expected and decided not to go. Maybe weather. The theater tickets have gone up by a significant amount. Advertisement problems as well. Yeah, I mean, advertisement I don't think has been too much of a problem, because there has been a lot of marketing, right? Typical marketing for a movie of this size, I feel. I think that the exposure of Mission Impossible has been about where the other films have been in the past. I do think that there's an argument that can be made, and this really won't be known for sure until, hindsight for one, and two, really until next year. But there's an argument out there saying this film should have gotten released, Mission Impossible should have gotten released over July 4th. The issue is that at that time, other than people who had speculations like that even I didn't know for sure until the numbers started coming in, the speculation was that Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny was going to just dominate that weekend. And so it does make sense from a marketing and from a business standpoint to hold off on that weekend. However, in hindsight, had they known that the film would be as massive a flop as it is, talking about Dial of Destiny, then they obviously would have, decided to change that, because then they would have gotten 2 full weeks. But it would have been interesting to see the battle between Disney, because ultimately Disney would have, again, they would have had to have still made the deal with IMAX before then, because Disney would have had it. Again, Disney is notorious for getting the premium format screens for as long as they possibly can. So it still would have been a headache for them in the long run. But yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that as far as the theater ticket prices are concerned, yeah, that definitely is going to have an impact. But what's interesting is that if you actually take what Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning has made so far, and you even take into account the average ticket price of roughly $13 right now, and compare that to what the opening weekend was last for the 2018 film Fallout, and look at the average ticket price for that, it has sold so far about the same number of tickets, roughly the same number of tickets domestically. And potentially actually even more, likely more internationally. Again, we'll go into those numbers and explain why I think more in just a second. But it is interesting nonetheless to look at those numbers the way that they are. So also, we have another super chat just coming in right now from Matthew Hammond. Thank you very much for the $5 super chat. It says, our studio is having trouble marketing their movies with fragmented entertainment options. Hey, well, thank you very much for that super chat, Matthew Hammond. I think it's a good point. It's an interesting point, right? Because you have now so many different places that you can go, right? I think there's a couple things. One, marketing is more difficult now because before, when moviegoing was a habit, right, before COVID really broke that habit, right, it was already trending downward, but COVID clearly had a much more profound impact overall. You definitely saw, right, that trailers were a little bit more effective. People like to show up on time. They knew they had 20 minutes of trailers. So I'm one of the persons where, especially before the pandemic, I really liked getting there first thing to watch all the trailers to see what was coming out. Obviously in today's market, I'm not nearly as sad if I happen to miss anything. It's just, the trailers have gotten so long. Like when you have 20 to 25 minutes of trailers, it is just completely insane. But because you don't have that as a habit, right? You don't have the movie going habit as you did previously. What that means is that you're not going to have those trailers be as effective as they once were, right? Because obviously if you have more people seeing a movie, you have more people being exposed to trailers, ergo your marketing tends to be much more effective. But now, again, especially with the dawn of the internet and with the expansion of the internet, especially over COVID, right, with streaming and the growth of streaming platforms, et cetera, and the growth of technology like ad blockers, for instance, it becomes a lot more difficult to reach out to different people. What I find the most interesting, and it makes sense to a certain degree because people obviously still drive a lot, is that I've seen, I guess it's because I've been on some road trips more recently, but I started to notice billboards, right? Typically, I don't really notice billboards. Normally, it's like, oh, they're in there for maybe a second and then they kind of fade away. But I started to notice it's just kind of crazy to me that these studios are still spending probably pretty decent money on these billboards for their movies. I guess, again, it seems like such an old school way, but I guess it must be, effective to some degree, right? But anyway, it's a good question, and I definitely think that there is definitely something to that. All right, we'll get to a few more comments, and then we will jump over into the discussion on Mission Impossible's box office. Let's see. Dragon Smoke, I see you over on Kick. Bruce, I see you over on Kick as well. Thank y'all very much for being over there. For anyone wondering, I do indeed stream to multiple places, a plethora of places. Mike Jackson does say, might be time to call X-Ray Girl to organize those movies. No, I wouldn't do that. Oh, man. Wex, it definitely felt that way, man. It definitely felt that way. It was something I was not prepared for, and it didn't scare me nearly as much as I thought it would, but yeah. Father Chris Miller says, 20 minutes in. Good. Hope you enjoy it. Reddy says, hi, just watched Mission Impossible 7. Loved it. It is great. Candy T, Mission Impossible 7 was so good. I loved it. I loved it too. And I think when I say that and when other people say it, for some reason in people's heads, when they hear people say Mission Impossible 7 was awesome and that they loved it, I think that some people just assume that means that we think it's the best movie ever. It's like, no, we're just saying it's a good movie that's well worth your time to go see in theaters and is a lot of fun. Is it my favorite of the franchise? No. I'm actually rewatching the entire franchise right now. Going into the rewatch, the fourth one, Ghost Protocol, had always been in my head, the one that I always went back to and I really enjoyed a lot. So I'll be interested to see whether, Rogue Nation or Fallout end up sticking with me also. The fact is that it's a well-made movie. It's a very well-made movie. It is definitely on the long side. I think there are some valid criticisms of this film, for sure. It's not a perfect movie. None of these movies are. But at the same time, that does not then automatically mean that the movie's bad or that the movie's not good or it's not worth your time or it's not worth the money. And I think that the numbers that we see coming in right now indicate that a large portion of people going to see this movie, in fact, a super majority to an extensive degree, right, are recommending this movie. It's very hard for you to find anyone out there that's saying, don't go see this movie, or this movie sucks, or this movie's not worth your time. Are they out there? Sure. But the number of them is very, very small. It's very rare you have movies like this that are able to get together, quote unquote, mainstream media outlets and then more independent media in support. And when you have a movie like that, ultimately that means that you're doing something right. It's a clear sign that something is indeed going right there. All right. Let's see. Want to make sure to get to this. Miss Modern Muses, I see you in the live chat. Miss Modern Muses, thank you very much for the super sticker rose. Always appreciate your love and support. You're awesome. All right. So I will get back into the chat in a little bit. Let's go ahead and talk about this first bit of news because, again, talking here about Mission Impossible, I think it is important for us just to get the facts out there, right? To get the information out there about why people like me, I talked with Valiant Renegade. Renegade and I are on the same page here when it comes to seeing the fact that this movie is doing well, despite what some people might want to say. Again, we're not saying the movie's doing exceptionally well. We're not saying the movie's breaking records. We're not saying that the movie did not come in underneath the projections from the so-called experts. But what we are saying is that based on the data in front of us, it is still doing well. It is doing exactly what a Mission Impossible film does. And guess what? Mission Impossible films in the past have done very well at the box office. Now, if you want to argue that it's doing well, but that compared to its budget, maybe it's not doing so hot, okay, that I think is worthy of a discussion. But if you're going to word it in the way that it's not doing well, flat on the surface, again, that I just do not think is accurate. So diving into the numbers. So this is something that I brought up. I believe I was able to bring this up in my box office breakdown yesterday, and that is the comparing of the not only opening weekends adjusted for inflation, but also the average ticket sales too. So if you look at the history of Mission Impossible, right? None of the films, and this is something I mentioned yesterday, none of the films have been able to reach the heyday of the very early days of the franchise. What's interesting is that the first Mission Impossible film, when you actually look at the data, had about 10 million tickets sold. 10 million tickets on opening weekend. And the only film that did better than that, right, if we're talking about the domestic opening weekend, was Mission Impossible 2. Mission Impossible 2, even though it is the worst of the franchise, easily, arguably, it still actually had the best opening weekend ticket sales-wise, and also financially, too, with $104.6 million when you adjust for inflation. And so with that in mind, hey, that's a pretty good number. What's interesting, though, is that you've seen significant drops in these opening weekends, right? And this, I think, is showing you also how movie-going habits have changed and how less people are going to the movies today than what they were, and also over the course of time, right? For instance, from 2000 to 2006, you have, of course, this drop in opening weekend, 10.7 million for Mission Impossible 2, 7.2 million for Mission Impossible 3. Now, personally, I think a lot of that's because Mission Impossible 2 was so bad, people were not nearly as confident that the third one would be any good. But hey, third one ended up being, compared to 2, significantly better, much more entertaining, and probably had one of the best villains in Philip Seymour Hoffman. And again, there's obviously issues with that movie. It's a J.J. Abrams movie, so there's going to be things that we could absolutely point out. You can't argue against the fact, though, that when it comes to Philip Seymour Hoffman, he was great in the movie. He played a great villain. He was absolutely, he was so evil in his portrayal, and it was exactly what the franchise needed, was kind of this rebirth. Luckily, Abrams did not have the reins in the next movie, and I think Ghost Protocol was then able to pick up with it. Now, remember, I mentioned this yesterday, too, Ghost Protocol's opening weekend is low, right? 7.6 million, 1.6 million tickets. And the reason why is because it had a limited release in IMAX. So in just a few hundred screens, it was out for a week. And so that is unfortunately what the data has been given as far as its opening weekend, even though that's not very accurate, right? Now, we know that this movie did go on to make a decent amount of money, especially compared to its overall budget. Now, that's why I have been more so focusing less on those movies and more so on the last two movies, right? Starting with Rogue Nation 2015, Fallout in 2018, and now comparing that to Dead Reckoning, all right? Because if you notice, right, what is the trend between these two movies? Between 2015 and 2018, what do you see? You see them have a roughly the same number of tickets and the same number of box office. What does that mean? It means that for opening weekend numbers, it was able to keep its audience. Its audience was able to be retained. That's a very important thing in a franchise, especially when you were in Fallout. That was the 6th movie in this franchise. So when you got to the 6th movie, you're still having and holding on to an audience. That's a very, very good sign. Go ahead and look at those numbers. 6.5 million tickets, 6.7 million tickets. Again, these are estimates, but it is important. $72 million, $74 million respectively. So a slight increase in the opening weekend domestic when you compare those two movies. Now, what is the 3-day domestic for a film like Dead Reckoning Part 1? So if you just look at the opening, the first, really, we could say, first Friday to Sunday, it was domestically 56.2. But remember, it's actually closer to 80 million because it had those early day releases. So as of by its first Sunday, it was at $80 million. And so, yes, obviously I'm of the sort, I'm of the mindset that you cannot really compare fairly a 5-day advantage, right? Or rather technically like a 2 or 3 day advantage on a movie's opening. But it is interesting nonetheless because, well, we have to give it something because we can't also, at the same time as we can't compare a 3-day to a 5-day, we also can't just compare the 3-day to 3-day when we know there's extra dollars out there because of again, very interesting and very unique release schedule, right? So that's why you can't just take the $56.2 million versus $74 million blindly. And so when you take that into account, that's the reason why when you look at, okay, 4.3 million versus 6.7, but then it's actually 80, well, guess what? If you put in the actual total tickets sold by its opening weekend, by its first Sunday, guess what? It is right up there with the previous two movies. It is right up there with Fallout and Rogue Nation. It has the same number of tickets sold in its opening frame as those other two movies, or roughly the same. Obviously, there's small differences and variations, right? But it's still well over 6 million tickets, even taking into account the fact that it costs $13 a movie ticket these days. So that is, I think, a very important factor to take in, right? That's the first piece of evidence there is, okay, this movie is not doing so poor that in comparison to the other movies, it's falling, right? It has not lost its audience. Its audience has retained and remained the same domestically. But where is this film actually going internationally? This is what I think is the most interesting of all, because remember, Dead Reckoning, again, as far as Mission Impossible is a franchise, it is an international franchise, right? This movie, especially, it's specifically itself and many of the others have shot on location in different places. They've had premieres in these countries where they shot these things. And so it had a $235 million global opening. Now, remember, I made this point in my box office breakdown. What other films have we seen that have made 900 plus million, up to $1 billion at the box office, have made around this amount of money? You have Minions Rise of Gru, which came in around the same amount of money worldwide when you look at the numbers and went on to make $950 million. And then you also have last year's Top Gun Maverick, which opened at $250 million. That movie went on to make $1.5 billion. Now, do I think Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is going to make $1.5 billion? No, I honestly don't. For many reasons. I think that Top Gun Maverick is a better movie. I think Maverick is more entertaining. I think Maverick was able to do something with especially the shots in the jet that this movie is not, because as impressive as the stunts are in Mission Impossible, I don't think they're as impressive. For me personally, they're not as impressive as being inside an actual jet, being inside an actual fighter jet and experiencing the actual G-forces themselves, right? That was just very, very impressive. So we have two very different franchises, two very different IPs, and those audiences, though they have crossover, are they're also going to be a little bit different. Not everyone who saw that movie, not everyone who saw, I don't know why I'm just blanking, Top Gun Maverick, are necessarily going to be the exact same 1-to-1 ratio that have and are going to see Dead Reckoning Part 1, for one. Now, here's the most interesting part of all, right? And again, very important for us to bring up. Okay, $235 million, but let's go ahead and compare this to another Mission Impossible movie. Let's actually compare this to the last Mission Impossible movie. In fact, I went ahead and went back in time and found Nancy back in 2018. Good old Nance. And this is interesting, isn't it? Back July 30th of 2018, Mission Impossible jumps higher with record $156 million global opening. $156 million global opening. So I look at these numbers right here and I think to myself, okay, it had $156 million globally in 2018. Now I hear what you're saying. Yeah, but we have to adjust for inflation. I completely agree. And guess what? When you adjust for inflation, it gets up to about 180 million or so. I think that's what I was able to figure out there. Let's see. Yeah. Rate of inflation is $1 today, was worth $1.23 back then. So $191 million is what the global opening would have been. All right. $191 million. Wait a minute. The global opening for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is at 235. Even if you were to say, yeah, but it also has several days advantage, okay. Even if you grant that, what are you left with? You have very similar numbers. What does that mean? This movie is doing just fine. It is performing as well as previous Mission Impossible movies. It is not losing any mass quantities of audience at any point. This, I think, is one of the better pieces of evidence because you are literally comparing opening global weekends to global weekends. And because the difference there is, again, roughly $40 to $50 million, that is a very important distinction to make. Now, remember, too, right? This movie, some are going to argue saying, yeah, but this movie came out at a time when it was a lot more competitive at the box office and there was no real competition for this movie. And so you have to take that into account. And again, I understand that argument. I just do not think it's a very good argument. And the reason why is because just because there's competition does not mean a film is going to suck or is going to fail or succeed. Good movies with good positive word of mouth will succeed even in the most competitive of environments. We've seen that happen. Right? We've seen that happen historically. And so to say that competition itself is a death knell for a movie is just not true. Dial of Destiny is not failing because of competition. It's failing because the movie sucked. Dead Reckoning Part 1 is not doing as well as other movies, and in some cases even better than other previous Mission Impossible movies because of competition. It's doing well because it's a good movie that the vast majority of people enjoy. And that when you actually look at some of the data that's a little bit more reliable than something like CinemaScore, for instance, guess what? People are not only liking this movie, they're also recommending it to high degrees. Now, as I said, I don't think it's necessarily the same height and the same hype around it as Top Gun Maverick had last summer. However, I still think that it is still palpable, right? It is still something that it's a very powerful emotion that people are having towards this movie. And so again, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, if you actually look at the data, the historical data, very important data, right? This movie is doing fine. Now, let's say if it drops off 60, 70% domestically and internationally next weekend, okay, then it's in trouble. Then we can start talking about this film actually being in trouble. At this point, though, it's just not there. And again, I go back to looking at the other previous Mission Impossible films, right? Of the last few Mission Impossible movies, right? So first off, remember, the opening weekend for Dead Reckoning Part 1 is higher than what it was for Fallout, even when you adjust for inflation. Dead Reckoning had a better global opening. That's a very key thing. Also, if you compare these numbers, right, look at the domestic versus international. These Mission Impossible movies, especially the last two, have been major international hits compared to domestic, right? $250 million roughly for both Rogue Nation and Fallout, respectively. Over $600 million for each of those movies internationally. Right now, with a $155 million international start, that's a very strong start. That's a very strong number for this movie. And that means is that this movie is likely going to be as good or as strong as a performer in the markets that it's in right now. And we actually have seen that it is trending upwards in some of these markets too. But also look at those overall numbers. Rogue Nation, $850 million when you adjust for inflation. And again, that's not using the most current form of inflation. So I just want to give that caveat out of the way. Fallout, though, $900 million. So this movie right now is about 40 to 50 million better than the global opening of Fallout, and Fallout ended at $900 million. Using that historical data, we can then think, okay, there's a good chance then that Dead Reckoning could end up having the biggest box office of the more recent franchise movies. Makes sense. Stronger start, stronger finish. It's not always the case, right? Again, what's going to make the difference? What is going to actually tell us the health of this movie? The week 2 drop-off. As almost always, in every case, the most important factor to look in because it gives us an idea of how strong a movie's legs are. And if this movie's able to have a strong box office showing and is able to have a strong hold, even in the midst of the competition that everyone keeps trying to bring up as going to somehow be the death knell for this movie, even though the audiences in many cases don't cross over. The closest argument that you can make, because I've heard this argument that, oh, well, it's going to lose money to Barbie. I'm sorry, but you cannot tell me with a straight face that the audience that's going out and raving about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning in a major way is the same exact audience for Barbie. You just can't. Now, again, are there going to be some audience members that will go see Barbie who also saw and enjoyed Dead Reckoning? Absolutely. But if we're going to honestly say the people that are enjoying this film the most, as far as an actual body of people are concerned, we know that Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning is skewing what? It's skewing male and it's skewing older. Barbie is going to skew what? Female and younger. Just based on that alone, you have two different audiences. Barbie's not going to take much away from Dead Reckoning. What might be able to take some people away is Nolan's Oppenheimer. However, even then, we have to remember Oppenheimer, serious drama, Mission Impossible 7, popcorn flick, action film. Also, two different films, two different audiences. Again, you'll have a lot more crossover there because both of those films will skew what? Male and older. None of those films are really going to be impacted at all by Barbie, though, because, again, very different audience as far as the general audiences that go to see to support these movies. So what we have here is, again, Dead Reckoning Part 1 is doing just fine. Now, again, I can already hear people saying, yeah, but that $290 million budget, that is what is going to be the ultimate factor. Okay, but remember, if we actually look at the data, and again, you all know that when it comes to break-even points, my break-even points are a little bit different than others, but let's go ahead and actually look at that as well, okay? And again, we'll have a much firmer grasp on this when we get to next weekend with those week 2 drop-offs internationally. I suspect that we could see Dead Reckoning get well north of $500 million. And guess what? If it gets well north of $500 million globally, you know what that means? It is right up there with where exactly Top Gun Maverick was last year. And I honestly think that you could potentially see the domestic market not obviously come anywhere close to Top Gun Mavericks. I just don't see that happening. But I think internationally, you have a conversation going on there. And if there's even a conversation on any of those levels, that's why $1 billion is still on the table. The break even for Dead Reckoning Part 1 on a $290 million budget is roughly $725 to $750 million break even point. Now, some people use a 3 times multiplier for the budget for the break even. That would put it at $900 million. And it's that one, if you take a higher break even point where you say, okay, but then if it only gets $900 million, then that means it doesn't really make any money. That's only if it makes $900 million. Right now, as I showed you, right? Fallout, $156 million global opening, $235 million global opening. And a lot of that's because internationally, it is doing very, very well. Domestically, it's doing fine, but internationally, it's doing very, very well. If you're already starting to see this trend, and if the percentage of where this film is above where the previous film was continues, right? If that percentage above continues, then that's the reason why $1 billion is on the table. Because back here, Fallout, this ended at $900+ million when you adjust for inflation. That's why $1 billion is still absolutely a possibility. It's not a guarantee by any means. No one's saying this film's guaranteed. If you are saying it's guaranteed to make $1 billion, you have to admit that you're guesstimating. But as far as historical data that we have to go off of here, the historical data is pointing to the fact that this movie is doing just fine and is actually doing well in many ways. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive back into the chat before jumping into a discussion about Sound of Freedom and, of course, any other discussions or comments that you might have about this movie. Let's go ahead and see what's going on over on Kick. Again, thank you all again for hanging out over there. Let us see. We have got here Justin with the red shirt, the Rogue Attraction. Howdy. Okay. Justin with the red shirt just saying hello to some people. I imagine you must be on mobile. That's why you can't hit the tag button. Or maybe I'm just not seeing it. Bruce, I think you found the Kick link. So Dan Crane, who's a member, says, Hail Odin family, hashtag God's children not for sale. Sound of Freedom, #1 at the box office, $1 per screen. It depends on what you're looking at, right? It depends on what you're looking at because it is doing very, very well. But in its, if you actually look at the data, let me go ahead and see if I can pull this up. Yeah, Sound of Freedom, it's doing really well, but no, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 had a better per theater ratio for the weekend. For the weekend, and it makes sense because it's a major box office film. However, and again, we're going to talk about this, the box office for Sound of Freedom is very, very impressive. Much more impressive than what we're seeing with Dead Reckoning. The fact is, though, both films are doing well. Now, Sound of Freedom is doing a lot better, especially when you compare what it's doing versus its budget and spending, but they're both doing well. And again, so I'm not tearing anything or taking anything away from Sound of Freedom, but as far as a fact, though, the per theater ratio, Dead Reckoning Part 1 had a better per theater ratio there. So let's see. Bruce says, visible, yes, thank you, autocomplete. Nice. And again, if you have a comment or question, please put @Odin in the very beginning of your comment. I know that a lot of people are commenting, but I do ask that you put @Odin. It just makes things so much easier on my end because I love hearing y'all's conversation. I love hearing y'all's comments and questions. But again, I kind of need to have that @Odin there. I'm not trying to be a pill with that. Manny V, 11 miles of footage, he says. Wow. Again, the fact that it's multiple miles of IMAX footage, again, them claiming it's only $100 million cost, I just don't buy it. I just don't. Brightburn, what do you think about the writers and actors striking together? What's your opinion? It just makes sense. I mean, it makes sense. They're both in situations where they want more money, and I'm a little bit more soft towards the actors strike. And the reason why, and I mentioned this on Friday Night Tights, that we have a mutual friend of the channel. I won't say her name out loud, just in case she doesn't want her name, associated with giving me information on this. But she is a member of the Screen Actors Guild. And one of the things that she brought up that I thought was interesting was that because of the dawning of AI technology, there is now this worry amongst the day players, right? Those who are working their way through the industry. And I'm not going to tear them down, right? Because I know that the people out there will say, well, why should they even try if they know that only a certain percentage of people can ever make it to stardom? Well, because not everyone wants to be a star. A lot of them do, for sure, but some of them just want to be working actors because they love acting. Some of them actually do still have a soul, Some of them still actually do have a passion for the craft. And ultimately, would you rather have real people on screen or AI-generated, CGI-generated people? I know I would rather see real people. I know I would rather see that, right? And one of the points that she brought up was that again, because of the dawning of AI, what AI does is it takes images, right? Because this is the interesting thing is some people are saying, well, AI has gotten to the point where it's going to create stuff, but it can't create anything. The only thing it can do is borrow data from elsewhere and then create something out of it. And so you could argue saying that it could get to such a degree where it's so obscure in the data that it's mining that it's created something that is unique and new, but it's still going to be borrowing imagery. It still has to borrow the data from somewhere. And so what a lot of these, extras actors are, or at least, again, this one that I've talked to has said is, well, imagine, again, you are working in this industry and then all of a sudden a studio decides, well, we're not going to hire you. We're going to use AI, and the AI is going to be gathering data, including data that could include your own face to create something new. Okay, well, you are still using the data from somewhere. And so there is I think a good argument, or at least an argument that should be heard out about whether someone should be compensated for their image and likeness being used, even if it does get changed later on because of CGI or because of AI technology. So anyway, Dragon Smoke. Did you see the BS YouTube pulled with Yellow Flash? I heard about it a little bit, but yeah, YouTube is just insane right now. Father Chris Riddler says, can we get Midnight's Edge on and have a verbal fight? No. Again, I didn't understand why it was such a passionate fight altogether, but I hopefully laid out the data. The issue that I have is that I hate text fights. I hate it because you can never explain all the details that you need to. And to me, it's honestly just a waste of time. And that's why I just ended saying, look, I talked about all this stuff and addressed many of the concerns and many of the issues you bring up in my box office breakdown. Go and watch that. And I don't think it was ever watched. But again, no issues here, I can say, as far as, I personally don't have that much beef. It's more of just like, what's going on here? Dr. Martin Van Nonstrom, what's going on? Let's see. Tajia527. I'm thinking the Al Pacino film Simone in regards to the Hollywood strike and the AI boogeyman bring on the digital actors. I don't think I've ever seen or heard about that one, to be honest. Let's see. Someone said that he said the budget was 180. Even that just seems kind of low, to be honest. The Morak tagged to say, good morning. My son and I just completed watching the first 6 Mission Impossible movies, and we'll be going to see 7. Hey, I hope you enjoy it, man. It has been pretty great. And yes, I've already not pre-bought. I actually did pick up a few copies. It's on Amazon too, Dr. Martin. The 4Ks for Alita and Heat are $4 right now. So I picked up a few copies for future giveaways. Superman, if he wasn't scared of green rocks. No KR. What's up, man? He says, I'd be happy to do a SFW gaming stream with you if you're interested. I grew up super religious, so my alt curse words are unique. I'll DM you to set something up if you're down. I mean, the other issue for me is I just don't have a lot of time, because it's one of those things where I would like to jump on every now and then with them. But as far as planning stuff out or committing to stuff, it's definitely hard for me to do because just everything is so crazy. But I appreciate the offer, man. Let's see. Father Chris Villa says, Japan just banned Oppenheimer. That's fair, though. I guess they already seen the film. Ooh, Father. Is that true? Dang. Wow. In all honesty, though, that shouldn't impact their box office too much. Japan can be a big draw for certain movies, but and especially for next weekend, too. Because the other thing people mention, and I don't think it's a fair one to bring up, some mention, oh, well, Mission Impossible 7 hasn't opened in Japan yet. Even I would say I don't think that's a good argument because there's a Miyazaki movie coming out next week. So if you're going to tell me that Mission Impossible is going to do better than a Miyazaki movie, and if you know anything about anime history or about Studio Ghibli, the name Miyazaki is huge there. That film's going to dominate. So even if it did get out there, it would be going up against a new Miyazaki film and the opening for Mission Impossible, which is an international draw. So I don't think it would have done that well there anyway. So I don't think that's much of a loss for them. Fitzgerald McKay says, I saw Mission Impossible 7 and I liked it. The length is noticeable, but I think they needed the length for the story. Yeah, again, I feel the length, but I think it was Definitely well done. Here's Johnny. What's going on? Welcome back. Sebastian tagged to say, is there another actor that can compare to Cruise in terms of being so successful for so long? Well, Sebastian, here's the one thing I will agree with. I think Tom had brought this up, and this is something that I've always held to. Tom Cruise himself is not a box office draw. I know that might be controversial to say, but it is true. What is my data to support that? Go back to the opening for The Mummy. The Mummy made, I think, $400 million worldwide. It was a massive box office flop. So just because Tom Cruise is in a movie does not mean people will go to see it. However, there's a caveat, right? If Tom Cruise is in an action movie that is well made, well promoted, and good, then it can make money. So again, I think that just to say Tom Cruise himself is the one bringing people out is, I don't think, true. Because if Tom Cruise is in a bad movie, as was the case for The Mummy back in like 2017, 2018, guess what? That film flopped. That film was a complete and utter flop. So again, Cruise has been successful in many, many things. But I think more recently, we can say he's been successful in certain films because he's willing to do things that other actors are not willing to do, and audiences appreciate that. So that's why the movie matters. Not so much him. He matters, obviously, but the movie, I think, matters a lot more. Joe the Writer says, did 85 hit a milestone or a stumbling block? Oh, man, I think that it definitely hit something. Let's see. Matthew Hammond, who is... thank you very much for another $5 super chat saying, I saw people questioning why Mission Impossible did not take as much as Top Gun Maverick. Is it possible people like patriotic movies in the United States? Well, that's the other thing too, right? Context matters. What happened last year for Maverick? Maverick came out as a film with the military. Again, it dealt with military. It wasn't really necessarily pro-military, but it was, again, actual fighter jets that were being used, where the actors were in them in the passenger seat, but it looked like they were flying them. And it came out over 4th of July. So that makes a lot of sense. In addition to that, the film was very good. It was well made. The effects were brilliant. The cinematography in the jets was beautiful too. The marketing campaign pushing that stuff and showing that stuff was great. So it had all of those factors going for it. And remember, if you actually compare opening weekend, global opening weekend, Top Gun Maverick had $250 million. Dead Reckoning Part 1, $236 million, roughly. So again, you have a bigger weekend there, you have a bigger opening there, and you could even argue that, well, hey, whereas Top Gun Maverick was able to get that 4th of July boost, this obviously is being boosted by other days of, early days of release. So again, they're not like for like, and I'm not saying that those are the exact thing, but I do think that it's still important to look at those numbers nonetheless, because as far as raw ticket sales are concerned, they're not too far away from each other. Maverick is clearly in the better case, the better scenario, especially because it costs a lot less, but it's not to such a degree at this point. Could that change over time? Absolutely. But at this point, there's not a lot there. That's the big thing for me, is that eventually some of these arguments could be valid, but as of right now, they are not. Nathan Slade tried to say, good morning, my friend. I love hearing the shills complain about Sound of Freedom. Keep doing it, lamestream media. You're only helping the movie, making more money, and become even more of a success. Absolutely, dude. JC tried to say, I'm curious to know how much money you think Indy will end up losing for Disney. Well, seeing that now the updated budgets are coming out, right now they're saying, oh, well, it probably cost closer to 350 to 400 million and not the 300 million we had first initially thought. I mean, because I think the movie probably cost a minimum of 400 million at this point, I would not be surprised if the film ends up being a $300+ million loss for the company. And again, I can't wait to find out the actual numbers next year. Let's see. Here in the Steadfast, what is going on? Will Gentry, what's going on, brother? Will Gentry, where you been all summer, man? Nathan Slay tried to say, it makes me look concerned for Mission Impossible because its box office needs to basically crack the $1 billion mark in order to be profitable. And again, if you use that 3 times metric, yes. But even then, again, I do think that there is not nearly as much that is essentially this. The movie needs to make $1 billion to be a hit, to be a success. To break even, if it ends up north of $900 million, that is still a success, because that would still make it one of the highest grossing films of the franchise when you adjust for inflation. And again, that cannot be ignored enough. Also, even though the budget is unique to this movie, you also have to take into account, okay, were they going to be able to spend less money on the next movie because of any sets that may have been built for this one. Who knows? And obviously, the one thing that's going to be a detraction to the next film is that the actor strike and writer strike is going to be slowing that film down. But again, this is a part one of a story, and so we ultimately will be looking at both of those films together. But even by itself, I think that it's still going to be able to justify its own spending. Let's see. Big Worm, who is a member, says, I saw the IMAX footage for Oppenheimer. You just mentioned a cost. Do you add that supposed cost into your break-even? $100 million is not chump change. No, because, again, that would have to be a part of the production cost. Film stock would be a part of the production cost. Again, the only thing that's not included in production cost, again, putting in the most basic terms, the only thing not included is marketing. So $100 million, if you take into account marketing, typical marketing for a movie of that size, typically a movie of that size, you would spend $50 million on marketing. So that would mean $150 million in total cost. And again, break even though would be about 200 would be for that movie if it is $100 million. I don't believe that it is, but if it is $100 million, the break even will be between 250 and 300. But anyway, Thanatos says there is a movie Looker from 1981 that dealt with AI taking over for actresses. It was a mystery thriller. It was rather interesting. Watch 2002 Simone with Al Pacino, which foresaw AI actor. Interesting. I did not know that. Big Worm, AI borrowing at a point. It becomes no different than an artist taking experiences to imagine new creation. I don't think people are really understanding that. I think that the big difference is that you are still having something, in this case, taking essentially, it's one thing to take art. It's another to take the image of a person. And I think that you could even understand why there's a moral problem with that. Because you're taking the image and likeness of God of an individual person and then using it for your other means without their permission. Brightburn85, I believe I saw an article that said Schwarzenegger and James Cameron, Skynet, or a version of Skynet, already has one foot in the door. I don't know how true that is, but hey. Mason Blakety, I talked about that at the beginning of the stream. Wex Tag say, I live in Europe. I hope we get Sound of Freedom here. I'll go and watch it ASAP. I want to support that movie. Yeah, man, I hope that it's available in some way for y'all soon. That'd be great. Reddy, I saw that you had tried to tag here. Says, who do you think is the better? Terminator 2, Mission Impossible 7, both have AI villains. Who do you think is better? Oh, Terminator 2 is a better movie by far. Terminator 2 is fantastic. I would never ever say Terminator 2 is Mission Impossible 7 is a great film, but again, it's not one of the best films ever made. Father says, how about Mission Impossible 8 starting Family Guy's tiny Tom Cruise? I'd go see that. Big Worm, I think during the Mummy release, things were different. So many big stars going forward. Cruise is building himself as more reliable. Again, I don't think that's accurate, though, because that movie was being sold on Cruise. And that universe that was being built was in many ways also being built and sold on Cruise. So, no, the reason why the film didn't do well is because the movie sucked. And again, Cruise himself is not going to be enough to bring out people. See, Brightburn. I don't know for sure, but I don't think Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat is a bad movie per se, but I couldn't tell you how much it made. No, it didn't. For all intents and purposes, Edge of Tomorrow was a box office failure. It had a huge afterlife in video on demand sales and in the Blu-ray and DVD aftermarket because it was marketed so terribly. The marketing for that movie was awful. But no, that's another example. Guess what? With bad marketing, Tom Cruise was not even able to sell Edge of Tomorrow. Now, again, since that time, it's done very, very well on Blu-ray, DVD, etc., but that is still a good argument about how he himself does not sell movies. The R, hail to you. What's going on? Let's see. Nathan Slay says, I will rejoice and praise the heavens above if Sound of Freedom makes more money in the United States alone than The Flash. Again, domestically, you could. Alejandro's opinion is better. Mission Impossible 7 will flop. Won't make over $800 million, but part 2 will cost less. Alejandro's opinion, no. No. Come on, man. There's no data at this point, Alejandro. I don't know if you just got into the chat, man, but you need to go back and rewatch it because I went through all of these points already, so I'm not going to repeat them. But there is no reason to suggest that Mission Impossible 7 at this point in time is doing any worse than any previous Mission Impossible movie of the most recent era. And guess what? All the most recent era films made north of $800 million. So just even historically, that does not back up. That does not actually stand to reason. Not to mention, as I mentioned at the very beginning, if you compare the opening worldwide of Fallout to Dead Reckoning has a 40 million plus advantage. So again, I understand that people, I don't. I really don't understand why there are so many people where it seems as if people are just wanting to hate on a movie or to have a contrarian opinion for the sake of it. I'm not saying that that's what they're doing. I'm just saying that's how it's coming across. Father Christopher Miller, have a safe flight. According to reports, Mission Impossible Directed Part 2 is in post-production, says Matthew Hammond. I mean, they filmed them around the same time. Alejandro, I just saw your live comment. Bro, I talked about that comment too. Please go back and rewatch the video because I'm not going to re-talk about those points, man. But that's not a good argument. Simple as that. Big Worm says, man, I didn't realize Edge of Tomorrow was a flop. It is, yeah. But it is still a great movie. Didn't see it in theaters and have no idea why. And again, that's the reason why. The marketing for it was not very good. That's the reason why. They say, my thoughts on if Barbie has a woke agenda. No, I was looking forward to a movie and Hollywood just had to ruin it. Really? You're looking forward to Barbie? Brother. Come on, man. Again, I can understand why some people might be looking forward to it, but I just can't. I'm going to go a little bit over time because I do want to talk about Sound of Freedom just a little bit before ending the stream. So let me try and see if I can pull that back up. So let's go ahead and talk about Sound of Freedom because this film is also doing incredibly well. All right. Star Goose, you have a good one, man. Thank you. Appreciate it. But here is a very important factor, okay? Because Mission Impossible, again, we've already laid out the case about why this movie is doing as well as previous films, and ergo why it is doing just fine. Why at this point in time, there is no data, there is no information to suggest the film is not doing well. Again, after week 2, that's going to be a huge factor because that's going to be a huge tell of whether the film is doing poorly or will do poorly or not. But at this point in time, everything's pointing to the film doing fine and in fact doing very, very well, especially compared to other Mission Impossible movies. And again, history matters. History absolutely matters. It tells us a lot of great details, okay? But anyway, Sound of Freedom is doing even better. Sound of Freedom is doing infinitely better, you could even argue, right? For one, in its second weekend of release, it went up 37%. They added 300 screens, meaning that it's diluting its per theater ratio, and yet was still able to increase its overall box office by 37% from last weekend. It also had an 8,207, right? 270. My goodness. Looks like we got a troll in the chat. Again, we are a family-friendly show, man. So I don't know if you're used to commenting on Friday Night Tights chat, but we don't have that type of conversation here, brother. Anyway, so Sound of Freedom, right? A 37% increase in its overall sales. Right now, it's at $85 million domestic. Again, not really anything going on internationally because it's not had that international release. But the fact is this: Angel Studios only spent about $5 million to get the rights to this movie. The original film only cost about $15 million to make. So even if you take into account the original production cost, the movie itself as an individual film is hugely profitable. And the fact that it's going to get to $100 million probably before this weekend, and then the question has to be asked of how much beyond, how much further is this movie going to actually do after that point, means that you could see this movie for Angel Studios specifically giving them about $100 million plus in net gain profits. And I see a lot of people out there saying, well, 85 million is not all that impressive when you compare it to the 300 plus million of Elemental or the 300 plus million of Indiana Jones. Yes, that is true if you are just looking at those numbers. If you are ignoring context, and we all know ignoring context, ignoring historical data, ignoring the data as it actually is a big problem because you are ignoring reality. These are the same people. This is the same logic that has led to CBR, a garbage tier website and organization, trying to say that internationally, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny has broken even. That's laughable if you know anything about the box office, all right? So let's just look at those numbers, right? $5 million is what they spent to get the rights. So Angel Studios obviously did spend a little bit of money on marketing, all right? Let's say that for the sake of argument, because typically with a production cost, take about half of that production cost, add that onto it, and you have an additional amount of money there being spent on marketing. So let's say the movie cost roughly $20 million or so. Maybe they spent 10, probably a lot less than that, but let's say for the sake of argument, it spent $10 million on marketing. So you're looking at a movie that for that studio, they only needed to make about maybe $10 to $20 million to break even. And again, this is using, I think, very, I'm making it quote unquote unfair for the movie just to show you how impressive this number actually is. Because even if you take a worst case scenario for this movie and what it needs to make to break even, this film has skyrocketed past it. against the original budget, it's already close to 5 to 6 times what the original budget for the movie was. So it becomes even more impressive when you realize that they don't need to make as much as what they would have had they had to spend the money on this movie, had they actually had to produce the movie, right? Had they not just gotten the rights to distribute it. And again, that just means more return on investment will be available to Angel Studios. So this movie is doing incredibly well. And some people have tried to point out, and again, people don't understand it, saying, well, it's not fair to count the pay it forward stuff. The pay it forward stuff is not, you can't say it's a lot of empty seats. Well, no, that's not how the pay it forward system works. If you actually go to Angel Studios' website, which I believe is angel.com, what you'll notice is that what they do is they take people's donations, and it's in a pool of money. You can then claim a free ticket, which will then allow you to buy a ticket, and it'll be charged to that fund. So what that means is that a ticket is not actually said to have been sold until someone actually claims that free ticket from the website. So actual money is going to the theater during that process, during that transaction. And so therefore, to say that that is funny money is just not true, and it's just not even accurate, especially when you look at the site, and if you look at the amount of money spent versus how much money it's made just from people walking up to the theater to spend it on it. Again, the argument really does not stand and does not really hold much water. The fact of the matter is Sound of Freedom is doing incredibly well. And when you add to it the fact that Hollywood and the media are constantly fighting against it and are constantly trying to dig up dirt and basically just flat out lie about Tim Ballard, lie about the movie, lie about the marketing, lie and say that it's a right-wing movie, lie and say that it's a faith-based movie, all the lies, they are still doing this well. That shows you the power of this movie, and it also shows you how little power the mainstream media has and how much power independent media has, and also how people now, more so than ever before in history, are able to find out information, and also, guess what? Able to find out truth. Able to find out, look up the truth, know the truth for themselves, and not have to rely upon this type of garbage that we oftentimes see from the mainstream media. But anyway, we are over time. I do want to get to a little bit of comments here. But again, Alejandro, I did address this point. Competition itself does not mean a dang thing. There are too many movies that have made countless millions of dollars that have had a lot of competition against them. If you have a good movie with good word of mouth, no amount of competition is going to stop you. Fedigator, any quick thoughts on the Napoleon trailer? I watched it. It looks okay. It looks okay. It looks well made, but again, when it comes to him, I just can't trust Ridley Scott. Again, he's always a hit or miss. So I have to wait and see. Big Worm, I want to see Barbie just for the experience. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I know that Gary says that he's not going to make us watch it, but I feel like we're going to talk about it. So, and I've always on the mindset where if I'm going to trash talk a movie, I need to have actually seen it to be able to say that. Will Gentry, in 3 words or less, is Sound of Freedom actually a good film? It is a good film. It is a good film. I did a review on it, Will Gentry. Check it out on the channel. It is spoiler free, and it is, again, I talk about it objectively because it's not a perfect movie. And I think some people are ignoring certain flaws that the film has, but as a movie, it is well made. It is good. Nathan Slay, it's breaking free at the box office. Odin might hate it, but I'm saying this pun to blame Tony from Deadline for this loss. I see what you did there. Laura, missed that one. Oh, no problem at all, Laura. No problem at all. No problem at all. I was able to find it and take care of it. So let's see. Momus Mouse says the number of theaters increased by 313. You don't see that too often. No, you don't. Again, it does happen. So it's not unique to this movie, but it is still something where ultimately a lot of people don't quite understand that to have an increase. The bigger thing to me is from a week 1 to week 2 increase of 30%. Right? We sometimes see that down the stretch where you'll have an increase over box office. From week 1 to week 2, you typically don't. Now, again, I do think that Sound of Freedom is a unique film, and so it's not impressive as, let's say, for instance, if Mission Impossible had that. It's not going to happen, right? It's not going to have an increase of anything like that. And in fact, it's going to drop probably, I would say 50% or less would be my guess. We'll have to wait and see what those numbers are when they come out. But I do think that regardless of that fact, it is still on paper, especially compared to how much they spent, still doing very, very well. So anyway, let's see. Michael Deesh, what's going on? Mark Peter, welcome as well. They'd say, tag to say, thank you for paying. Thank you for explaining the pay it forward system. No problem at all, man. No problem at all. Anyway, I do got to run. I'm a little over time. I don't want to, not that a lot of people necessarily are still watching this if they watch the Geeks and Gamers Daily anyway, but I don't ever want to cross streams or take away anyone's attention from them because they're my brothers over there. I don't know if the video posted yet, but the box office breakdown should be posting. The Geeks and Gamers box office breakdown should be posting, if it hasn't already, sometime later today. There was a little confusion behind the scenes, but it should be posted pretty soon. Make sure to support the Geeks and Gamers daily stream, though, because they are awesome and do great work. I need to probably get myself looking at my movies or finding out. There's a lot of work going on around the house because my wife's friends who are staying over, they are of the trying to help and organize and do that kind of stuff. So anyway, with all of that being said, check out Geeks and Gamers Daily. Thank y'all again for the love and support. Matthew Hammond, Miss Martin Muses, thank y'all very much for those super chats. Also, Reed, thank you for that donation via Streamlabs a couple days ago as well. Sorry I was not able to get to that on the Saturday stream. But as of right now, the plan is still to have a stream tomorrow on the OMB Report. That's my news and politics channel. So check out the OMB Report live tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then we should be able to also still have the Good Morning Asgard podcast on Wednesday. And we'll have some more data. So we'll actually get some daily information on how not only Sound of Freedom is doing, but also how Mission Impossible 7 is doing. And let's just say, I suspect that when Wednesday comes around, not a lot will have changed. Sound of Freedom will still be doing incredibly well, might be that much closer to $100 million. And I also think that Mission Impossible 7 will continue to show that it's performing like many other similar Mission Impossible movies. But those are going to be all the thoughts that I have. If you have any other further thoughts or questions about especially the box office for Mission Impossible, I talk about that earlier in the stream and video, so check that out if you can. So that way you can get that information. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illick, Hymir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Mono Major General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my subscribe star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank y'all very much for being my supporters at the Keep It the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out a ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.